Yep, mostly.
Great. Whereabouts are you? Are you in? Because I saw a picture on Instagram of you on a plane. Are you back in
No, I'm in
Canada?
York.
You in New
No, I'm in
York?
York.
Right.
No,
Okay.
York.
York.
Oh,
Oh, no,
No,
York.
no.
York, like
Just right.
Yorkshire. Yeah,
Yep, just up the road.
yeah,
Because we're in
yeah.
Leeds, so just up the road from
Oh, I
you.
see. Yeah, to go back down to London tonight. So yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we are live. Okay.
We are
So,
live.
welcome everybody. Today on the interview we have Dr Nora Lorway, who is one of the leading exponents in live coding. Very well known. Been in Mixmag magazine. Much has been written about what she does. She has some very interesting research into this subject and into various other things to do with being a computer musician. So, play the intro. So, Nora, tell us, how did you start with live coding?
I started when I was studying my PhD at University of Birmingham, so somewhere time around 2011, maybe 2010. Um, yeah, it had. I think there had been a scene already at that point, but yeah, I guess I was at the right place at the right time. So my PhD was focused on making software with SuperCladder, which is a programming language for DSP. So it's kind of a natural progression. So I just happened to be around at the time where things were kicking off, I guess, with that scene. So yeah, so around then.
Right, it's great. And with live coding, how would you say your experience differs from playing conventional keyboards and controllers in real time? What makes it for you such a compelling interface and medium as opposed to using a conventional keyboard and controllers, etc.?
I think you have more control over what you can do with it in terms of you're writing software from scratch in real time. So you have control of the back end of say if you were using a piece of commercial software, you have control of the back end of that, so you can basically do anything you like, depending on the programming language you use. So yeah, I think it's a lot more I have more control, and you can, to me, it can do much more interesting stuff. It's also the idea of experimentation and failure in the performance. It's not always a dependable result. So yeah, you play around with what you have. So it does make kind of the practicing it a little bit harder sometimes, but a lot of it is improv based. I think most live coders would agree with me. So it facilitates that more. And as a programmer, I studied computing in university as well. So and also piano performance. I think the two together to me make sense. But yeah, it depends on your background as well, I think. So yeah, I think a lot more flexibility maybe.
Yeah, because I've heard of other live coders also working with live musicians, with live percussionists, and with other live musicians. Have you ever been tempted to explore that aspect of it, or do you see yourself being focused on coding?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of work with other musicians. I think like working with people in acoustic instruments. I did when I was part of BEER, which is the Birmingham Ensemble for Electroacoustic Research, which is the live coding laptop group that I was a part of at Birmingham. And yeah, we did some work with pianists, and by basically taking their sound and then live coding the sound through MIDI data. So yeah, I've done some work here and there, but I'm not that particular. I haven't really been that interested in kind of integrating it, because most of the live coding stuff I do is for algorithms and making dance music. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm not that. I mean, it's interesting stuff, but I'm just not it hasn't been something I've really actively pursued, I think, at all. So yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Dance music, where would you cite yourself within the fields of dance music? Would you say you're more towards sort of post techno, Aphex Twin, or showing my age here, the 80s rave scene, jungle, that's that late that sort of early 90s period. Where would you musically cite yourself in terms of dance?
Um, yeah, I don't really have any category I'd say I would put myself in really. When I started playing algorithms, which I think I played one of the first, was one of the like the early adopters or one of the first people I think to play algorithms. There's a group of us. I don't know. I was doing mostly like always been techno, I guess, the kind of Berlin techno, not Detroit as much. But I think these days, yeah, I think I would be more the kind of Eastern European stuff that's coming out since 2014. Stanislav Tolkachev, very polyrhythmic stuff, dystopian. It all started from the revolution in 2014 in Ukraine, and people were not going to bed. They didn't have anything to wake up for anymore. So that kind of resonates with what's going on now to maybe. So yeah, very kind of darker stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, I think Algrave is not a genre of music. It's more of a collective. I think people do get confused by that. So yeah, there's all sorts of different genres of dance music that occur in that. So yeah.
Yeah, so really and truly, Algrave really is descriptive as a way of doing things, as a means of describing a music direction. Would you say?
Yeah, I guess so. I think it was meant to. I mean, there's all sorts of different answers for this. But sorry, what was the question? Like, what was the?
Sorry, so I described sort of asking is Algrave more a description of a way of doing things, i.e., by live coding, by
Yeah, like
Or is it an
kind
instrument, more like playing a guitar or a violin, rather than
kind of
being a
yeah.
folk musician?
It's not necessarily for you don't have to live code to play in an algorithm. The idea is it's dance music that's made with code that doesn't have to be live. Like it could be a max patch that someone wrote beforehand. I think there's a myth that it is
right,
live
yeah,
coding, and
yeah,
I think
because
maybe people listening to this who may say otherwise. It's kind of contentious, I think. But yeah, you don't need to necessarily be live coding to be doing an algorithm. I think that it is a bit gatekeepery. If
yeah,
you know what I mean, yeah. And I think I have a problem. I have many problems with the whole algorithm scene. I think in general because some people do think it is more to do with live coding and then showing your screen, whereas I think it's anything code based and has evolved in that the last 8 years or so. It's been 8 years. So yeah, so it's anything with code. It's not necessarily live coded, but yeah, that's definitely an aspect of it. So
yeah, because that, to be honest with you, that's what I thought Algrave was. Because all the people that have posted about Algrave have all been about showing their screens
yeah,
and about love. So yeah, I have got that misconception myself. So that's actually quite interesting. So therefore, you can participate using pre-designed software instruments of whatever origin they may be, whether you've used a max patch or whether you've constructed something beforehand in Super Collider and just simply turned up
yeah,
and booted up and used it.
yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
It's
yeah. So
interesting.
it's
So I'm interested. So where's the dividing line then? So if I take a digital synthesizer that's written in code, obviously.
yeah.
So does that count, or where do you actually cut the line?
Well, that yeah, it is hard to say. I mean, these days I don't know anymore. Like, I kind of haven't played in a quote unquote official algorithm, although we've had my students in Falmouth have done variations of that, and we've written papers. I've wrote the kind of I don't really do much music research anymore. Mostly doing like AI healthcare, but I did work on a paper at a project last year called Autopia, which was making a live coding AI collaborator that basically did some machine learning and was learning the code for live coders and then collaborating with live coders. So, but yeah, again, it wasn't necessarily for dance music either. So so it really depends. I think it's, you could be using a synthesizer that you coded the software for. I mean, it's really, I think the sky's the limit in my opinion. I don't know. Some people may think otherwise, and yeah, that's the problem I think with it. So sorry, I don't mean to start a controversy, but yeah, I do have some issues with the kind of accessibility of an algorithm, for example, and I think there's a lot of people who are afraid of performing in them because they think really they're not really able to, you know what I mean? Like they're just not of that ability, but like I think anything goes, a little bit of code can go a long way. So
Yeah, because I'd had similar problems with it, because of the sort of, it's like all genres. There's that there are fundamentalists who have this very fixed idea of what that scene must be and is based around. And I really didn't realise it was as flexible as all of that, because unfortunately some of these people are some of the loudest people that
yes, yeah,
really try to define what a particular scene is and what its objectives
yeah,
are.
definitely,
Um,
yep,
as a programmer myself, with some of the Algorave pieces that I've seen, some of them that they've described as being algorithmic, to me, as a programmer, actually haven't been algorithmic.
yeah, I
That's
agree,
not what an algorithm actually is. And
yeah,
I'm afraid to say I have actually confronted them with this on Twitter at times, and
yeah,
not
yeah,
had very good responses from them.
yep,
Yeah, it's like all these things. You get people that get very, very defined ideas about what something should or shouldn't be. Um, Interesting enough, with your stuff, which is very, very dark, and it's very similar to my stuff at times, which also can be very, very dark, or people tell me it can be very dark. For me, when I start with some of these pieces, it's me laying my hands on keyboard, twiddling knobs, that sort of thing.
yeah.
With live coding, how do you actually start a piece? Where do you actually start?
Well, I mean, some people have boilerplate code, so things they've already set up ahead of time. They're just changing parameters. Other people start from scratch. I'd like to start from scratch with an idea, but again, I also, it's not you can use boilerplate code as well if you want to. So kind of pre-made stuff that you then adapt or build on. But the other problem is, of course, you need to make sure that things don't crash in the middle of. And I think some people think that's it's exciting when it crashes. I personally find it a bit not so great if you're at playing at an actual club. And I have played at proper clubs, and I don't think people appreciate when the music stops, right? So having a backup, whether that's something in Ableton or just something that's going in case. So yeah, I just making sure you're backed up.
I must admit, Nora, when I was playing one of your current streams, Ableton crashed on me, and fortunately, my hardware synths and my hardware sequencers were able to keep going, and I couldn't restart Ableton, because if I'd have done that, I'd have crashed the stream and everything. So what I did, which is simply to improvise with the bits that I had left working for that reason. I didn't want the whole thing to come crashing down around me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's just kind of it's performance, making sure you're kind of like making the music keep going regardless, I think. And that, yeah, I think that's so if you're going to play, like a lot of the algorithms I've played have been big festivals, like fairly big festivals or in actual venues like Corsica Studios in London and places like that. And yeah, it is kind of, you don't want to, you got to make sure you don't crash. I mean, it does happen, but like having a backup sound to that is, I find, the most important thing. Whereas if you're playing at a small venue that's more experimental, I think you can get away with it. It's just audience expectations, I think. So
no one's paying you to reboot your PC.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of times when I've actually had to do that myself, and it's been deeply embarrassing. The worst I did was I did this audio-visual thing at one of the Cambridge colleges years ago, and I had something stuck in front of the computer fan and didn't realise it because it was in the dark, and the computer decided to overheat and subsequently turned itself off in the middle.
Oh, right.
And fortunately there was an acoustic piano there, and I just got on it and improvised till it cooled down enough that I could restart it. That was deeply embarrassing.
I think it's just making do with what else. Yeah, having a backup plan. I don't think it's sometimes good enough to just have everything crash and then just stand there going, oh, well, it's done. But, that's... I think
Yeah.
maybe it's because I have done piano performance, and that is like the most strictest of all the worlds. I think you have to memorize everything, and it's all about kind of image and I didn't really like that world as much, but yeah, I think because of that training, I still kind of think that way when I'm performing. So just
Yeah.
so yeah, that's kind of
How,
what happens. So
yeah, when you played the bigger festivals that you were talking about, did you go on with a particular set list in your mind? Did you completely improvise everything to ground up? Did you have things in place to start off? How did you deal with the bigger gigs?
I don't really have set lists. I mostly just have boilerplate code that I know reliable sounds that work. I do have. Sometimes use Tidal, which is another language, Haskell-based language, built on SuperCollider that is for sampling, and so that so you're loading samples into your buffers and things like that. So yeah, kind of sort of like a set list. But yeah, I do improv, but as long as if it's if you're playing an Algorave or something dance party, you need to have a beat. So that's the focus, I think. So yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't stress too much about that. Just kind of see what happens. But
Yeah, what we do in CSMA is that we've decided to split the labour. So Chrissy does the keyboardy stuff, and I do the beats. And what we do in order to share this is that we share the clock, which has come from either my drum machine,
okay, yeah,
my drum machine or my sequencer. So if she puts an arpeggiator in, it would at least be in time with whatever's coming out of my drum machines and sequencers and everything else. But this is how we've handled it, is that we've then sort of done this division of labour. And partly the idea is then that we don't tread on each other's toes as well during any sort of improvised bits.
Oh yeah, that's the other. Well, again, is a different story with collaboration. So with beer and the early Bile days, I guess. But with beer, we do use a software that was created called Autopia. It's a chat, and then also it syncs our code together. We're basically sharing code in a little kind of chat window, I guess you can call it. It's custom made software in SuperCollider. So but there's a clock that syncs us if we're doing anything kind of in time. So yeah, that's a different story. But when you're playing on your own, it's just sort of you can do whatever you need to do. But yeah, that's the. But with a group, live coding with a group is more struggle, I think.
Yeah, because I was wondering how you did beer and these larger laptop ensembles, because some of them got quite big, didn't they? So they've had 8 or 9 members at one point, or even more. How did you come together as an improv with all of this? Because normally with improvs, the larger the groups, the more difficult it becomes for everybody to integrate, and invariably somebody will actually stand up and conduct at some points. How did that actually happen with the larger laptop ensembles? How did you deal with this collab?
Well, as I said, we had in beer, I don't remember much about Bile anymore. I think we did have some custom tools to sync us, but that was a lot more. We weren't all using the same softwares, which is the problem, I think. But with beer, we were all using SuperCollider. We were all using just-in-time compiler. So everything is you can make changes in real time, and it reflects the change. But we also had created Utopia, which was a chat program. It also helped us share code and sync our code. So that was how we did everything, was through Utopia. We've written a paper about it in Computer Music Journal, I guess, if you want to have a look at it, but it explains the process.
Right, okay. I'll put a description up in the description for this afterwards. That's quite interesting. If people want to get into live coding, where would you actually suggest people start? Would you recommend starting with SuperCollider, or I believe that there's a language, Tidal Cycles, now, which is gaining in popularity, or at least on Twitter? Where would you suggest people actually start?
You could do either of those, or I think Sonic Pi was made for children, actually. That might be a good starting point, particularly if you aren't really into coding at all or have never coded before. I think Tidal Cycles has a lot of setup issues. I think it's fine, but I think it's a good language. But the setup process for it, unless it's changed, I haven't actually looked at it for this year recently. But yeah, you have to kind of set up with Super Collider running in the background as well. So with Sonic Pi, however, it's kind of all in one program. The IDE, the development environment's already kind of set up for you, so you don't have to do much of that. And there's lots of good tutorials. Sam Aaron's done quite a lot of good work with curriculum development, so for schools. So I think that one is probably the best place to start. And they're also like really good examples through the program that you can download and just test out. So I think that's probably the best place to start especially if you've never coded before. So
Yeah, because I had several people talk to me about live coding, and particularly this interview coming up, and they've all said, we'd like to know where to start. And I sort of said to them, have you done any sort of coding in your life before? And they kind of, some sort of had and some definitely hadn't. So this is an interesting point. I noticed there have actually been some short courses that have popped up now and again on live coding, sort of small seminars and at various points. But I don't know if anybody's actually doing regular courses yet. Do you know?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure anymore. Yeah, I think Sam Aaron, who is I think he created or co-created Sonic Pi at Cambridge. I think now I think he works exclusively doing live coding workshops for all ages. I think on his website he will have on the Sonic Pi website rather, you can get access to those. I think there's still definitely probably title cycle workshops that might be happening online. In terms of Super Collider development, Super Collider workshops for live coding, I don't think there have been many recently that I've come across. But yeah, I think Sonic Pi and Title probably would be the best bets.
So. That's good. I'll put these in the descriptions afterwards, because I do get people asking me, and because it's not a scene I know particularly well, I could have sort of struggled to answer them, and sort of I kind of post them onto you now and again on Twitter, or I post them onto to some of the other live coders to help them out. But it's an interesting scene that's developing. Where do you think it's going to develop in the future? Have you got any thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, like, I'm working on some projects with some people that I can't really talk about too much, but that are making things more accessible if you want to get involved with live coding. So that's something happening. Also, doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence and live coding, so that's happening. And there's other people that are working with visuals, but yeah, in terms of where it's going, I don't know. It's hard to say, really. It hasn't died off. Obviously, people are still interested in coding. Getting the creative coding particularly is kind of a hot field at the moment. I know that there's lots of programs that are popping around the UK in terms of universities. Like UAL has a Creative Computing Institute, and UE, we also at Falmouth have creative computing. So it is getting popular, not just for music, but for visuals as well. And yeah.
I was going to ask you about this, because I've heard rumours of live coding happening in visuals, but I've not actually seen any of it myself happening yet. What's actually going on with that? Do you know?
With what? Sorry.
With live coding
I'm
visuals.
not actually. Yeah, I don't actually know for sure, because I haven't really been involved in that scene. I don't really do much of that myself, but I know there's a language called Hydra, which there's a woman in the U.S. I think she's in the U.S. Maybe she's in Colombia. I'm not entirely sure who created it. But yeah, it's not a scene that I'm really heavily involved in. I know there's a lot of collaboration between the music side. There'll be visuals people collaborating with sound people like Antonio Roberts, who's Hello Cat Food, who's collaborating with Bile, and he used to be in Bile for years, and he still does Algorave. So he's definitely active, and there's a lot of other people as well. But I'm not. That's a part of the scene that I guess I've never really gotten much involved. I do my own visuals for other things, but never for live real time stuff. So
yeah. I must admit, we're thinking of doing visuals in the future when we can actually gig again, and hopefully that will happen again sometime next year.
Yeah,
we're
hopefully.
thinking about doing visuals. The projectors now are getting really cheap, and we're thinking about how we can try and sort of sync the visuals to what's going on in the music. There's the old tried and tested method where people sync to a pulse from the music and it just have things moving around and flashing on one thing and another. I'm wondering if it's going to be possible to launch entire sort of video clips in the same way that you'd launch audio clips in Ableton. It's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, and see if we can find a way of doing this. The scary thing from my point of view is doing both the audio and triggering visuals at the same time. It's kind of a bit too much like multitasking for my sense. For my taste, I could see that getting in me. I could see me getting the two confused somewhere along the line. It could be interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
All these things. You did a soundtrack not too long ago. Think of the title and can't think of the title.
Anthropocene, Human Epoch.
Anthropocene. How did that come about? Did you live code the music in that, or did you use more conventional means? How did you deal with it?
I guess it came about in, I guess it would have been 2018. I was contacted by the directors, and it was a Canadian production. So, so most of it was live coded, but it was a proper major motion picture. So I had to follow kind of a lot of proper film industry standards. So I had to work with the scenes they would give me in pretty short notice and things like that. So it wasn't, a lot of it was using, maybe not live coded, but it was using Super Collider to make the sound. But I wasn't live coding a lot of it, mostly because I had to kind of do things in Logic and stuff like that. So I would process the sound in Super Collider and then just import it into Logic and work with the scenes. And so it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was the same, maybe this proper film scoring, which I don't actually have a lot of background in that at all. So this was kind of like my first time really. And also it was a pretty big film, and it was premiered at Toronto International Film Festival and Sundance and places like that. So.
Yes, because we looked it up this afternoon. It did quite well. It was played in quite a few film festivals.
It's in major theaters in Germany and in the US at the moment too. So it's gotten kind of a lot of press, and we were nominated for the Cinema Eye Awards, which are kind of the biggest documentary film festival awards in the US. So it was a lot bigger than I would have for a first time kind of film, I think. So that was kind of cool. But the music itself, my part, because I co-composed it with Rose Bolton, who's another Canadian composer, and my part was all done with using code, but it wasn't live coded as such. It was, so.
Yeah, you presumably, did you collaborate over the internet, over distance with this? Or?
We didn't actually, her and I didn't collaborate on music together. We were all given scenes her and I were given scenes, divided the movie. Her stuff was the more kind of instrumental part, and mine was the more electronic, techno-y, drone-y parts. Like I could, if you ever watched it, I could point at the scenes I did my parts were. But we weren't working together. We just happened to be both composing for it. So
you're both on the same film. Yeah, it's interesting. Did you enjoy the experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to do it again for sure. I haven't actually gotten around to kind of looking for more because my job's I'm a lecturer, so it's a lot of work with that for teaching research. So I don't really have a lot of time for that side. Plus, I also run a software company, so that takes more time than. But I'd like to get around to at some point, looking into more film stuff because you get paid quite well and royalties are good. So, but I think it was a good experience for sure. I think because of this experience, I tend to get asked to talk to students at work anyway about how to get into film scoring, and I unfortunately don't really know how to do that because it accidentally happened. They happened to find my music on Bandcamp and then just contacted me. So it was kind of maybe an untraditional way. I wasn't out seeking out work or anything like that. I did, it was something that I would definitely do again, but I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask how to get those gigs, I guess, because I don't know. I think you need an agent, and that kind of helps you with that. So
It,
that
it,
might be the,
it, it
yeah,
does. I mean, I did a certain amount of it when I was very young, 30 odd years ago,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I happened to know, and it was purely a social thing. I happened to know a guy who's now very very big, doing soundtrack work, and
Right, yeah.
he had a little production company, which he ran a bit like the old BBC Radiophonic Workshop, whereby he would get these small projects in and he would assign them to somebody to actually do, because the bigger stuff he would do, but the smaller stuff, he didn't actually physically have time for. And I also had this trade off with him that, because he couldn't play keyboards, and this was just on the cusp before MIDI was really, really popular, 1985, 1986. He used to ask me to play a lot of stuff because he was a guitarist. I'm also a guitarist, but he can play keys. So the trade-off is I would play his keyboard parts and he'd teach me how to produce, and that was kind of how I got started in all of this. But what used to happen is he would get a lot of blue chip corporate videos, training videos, all sorts of really sort of quite dull stuff, and he would say, right, yeah, can you put something sparkling on this or something like that? So
Hmm.
that's how I kind of got into it, by just having little small parts in these things, and it was really interesting. It was fun and nerve wracking in those days because there was no doors. It was all on tape, and it could all go horribly wrong, and you could stretch the tape. I was the only person to make a drum machine go out of time because I was using a Simpty sync to the tape and I stretched the tape, so it was a bit of a
Oh,
nightmare at
right,
times.
yeah.
How did you cope with
Sure, yeah.
did you find it stressful doing this, to deadlines? Because I know
Um,
what deadlines can be like.
yeah, it depended on the time of, I think when I was, because we teaching, I teach quite a lot during the term time, so I think it was
Right.
fitting it around, and it was, I guess it would have been like end of the second term that year that I was kind of like having to do a lot of it. So I think sometimes it was stressful, other times it wasn't. I think it was stressful when they had to, keep asking me to, well, and this is normal, like the directors would hear what I've done and send me back the scene and ask, so like, and you sometimes didn't have very long to do it, but most of the time it was all right. Yeah, I think though if I were scoring the whole thing myself too, because they did it in a kind of unusual, maybe not an unusual way, but they, because it was a documentary too. I think they tweaked a lot of the stuff. They had a sound editor who would tweak a lot of things, so that he was doing quite a lot of that work, which was good. So, um, so I wasn't on my own with that, which is nice. But yeah, I think if I would have done it all my own, it might have been. I probably would have had to take some leave from work or something, to do that because it would have been more intensive. But yeah, I think I found it okay. It was definitely an experience because I hadn't really had to do that before. So I had done
Yeah.
a short film for a friend in Vancouver, um, that he gave me kind of liberty to do whatever I wanted to with that. So, and he used some of my existing stuff before. So that was a little bit different, but yeah, this was actually working on with specific scenes that because that whole film is all based on different locations around the world, talking about the kind of Anthropocene phenomenon. So I had like different countries I had to like work with. Yeah, so I think timing things with, for example, moving vehicles and stuff like that could be a little bit more challenging, I think. Whereas there was one scene that was just pan shots over a lithium battery field that was a lot more easy to kind of deal with. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting thing, to get involved in. I actually do say to people, if you ever get the opportunity to do a soundtrack, do at least have a go at it because you'll learn so much in a short
Yeah,
space of
totally.
time.
Yeah.
Even to the fact of working with visual people who have a very different take on music than what you have,
Yeah, yeah.
and that in itself is very, very enlightening at times. You get you find out things about what you're doing from a completely different artistic point of view, and that in itself is very interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, oh
Uh,
absolutely. I think it's a very good experience. I think also it's neat. It's really good to see your music with visuals, and that got me thinking about how to about what musically it changed a lot of what I was doing anyway. I think I made a few videos for some of my tracks myself, but using like Unity and things like that. So, but yeah, I think it does transform your music when you have visuals. So that was a good experience, I think, for me for that one for sure. But yeah, might be interested in doing more if the opportunity came up, I guess.
Yeah. How's your research with gestural interfaces going? And I think that this has come from me looking at your page at Falmouth University.
Oh
Um,
right, yeah.
this is where this is where we're done with research. How's that research going? What?
Yeah, I don't actually do that anymore. Yeah,
All
I kind
right.
of haven't done that since these days I'm working with making working with artificial intelligence and healthcare. Actually, we have a
Right.
health and tech group at Falmouth. Yeah, so I'm not really doing much. Yeah, I'm not really doing a whole lot of anything besides that in terms of my research is mostly focused on AI and not even sound as much. Although we wrote some grants that were to do with working with AI and dementia patients, and I won a grant a few years back through the Southwest Creative Technology Network, which was it's a UK research innovation funded, it's like £6 million fund to set up a creative technology network within the Southwest. So Bristol, Falmouth, Plymouth, Exeter were kind of the hubs. And so I had a project where I made a game, immersive game experience using AI for grief and bereavement support.
Mm.
So I've been more interested in making tools for helping with mental health and other types of scenarios. So that's and I guess I have used some of the kind of gestural controller, I guess, background because in my postdoc at UBC in Vancouver, I was working on an instrument, actually a digital musical instrument that could be used to get away from the computer altogether and communicate with live coders. But that's done now, I guess. And that's all. I don't really touching that anymore. I'm more interested in kind of in immersive environments, but also more specifically AI actually, and using that as a collaborator. So instead of taking over, more working with AI as a companion, I guess, or an assistant.
AI in medicine is going to expand exponentially as
Yeah,
as the
yeah,
research is done, and we only have to see how important it's going to be for the current COVID situation that we're in.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
We're going to need all the help we can get, basically,
yeah. I think so.
in order to
Yeah.
develop this. Music and health has got interesting connections. I knew of people that worked in music therapy, and
Right. Yeah.
they found that people got an enormous amount of benefit out of it from various different ways, from being able to express themselves to being, and also for them allowing the music with time to actually influence them, to actually allow it to lift them at times. It's an interesting area.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, and I'm not even really doing much with music and health, but yeah, I appreciate that's kind of a fairly it's been around for a while. I think music therapy in general and art therapy for
Yeah,
sure. But yeah, no, I totally agree. I've kind of separated the making music now as a kind of thing I do
yeah.
on the side, but not to do with work because I think that makes it more enjoyable. If that makes sense, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Whereas,
seriously
yeah,
really does make it more enjoyable.
yeah,
I'm the same thing. I've got a reasonably good day job, which is actually very interesting. That I do research in various things for this company that I work for.
mhm,
Um, the advantage it gives me as an independent musician is I haven't got to sell CDs or downloads or anything. I
yeah,
can just simply explore stuff, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
we're very, very lucky in many ways to be living in an era when we can actually do this, where the equipment is accessible
yeah, for sure.
on so many different levels, and that you kind of don't need this huge toxic industry, which the record industry really is very toxic, and it always has been. Um,
Yeah,
In the same way that the theatre industry can be equally as toxic as well, from what
Yeah,
people
yeah,
tell me.
yeah.
And but we kind of don't need any of that. The computers made a huge difference in that respect.
Hmm.
The gear's got a lot cheaper, and we can just make music as people did 200 years ago. There isn't the need to have this huge supporting budget and financial operation behind it all. It's absolutely
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Oh, for sure. I think like a lot of my students are a lot of the ones I get are they become programmers and then they make music on the side, or they become creative technologists as well. So they're not necessarily working as musicians as such, I think, but I think that's good to have those transferable skills, and that's I think a really good thing. But not to not trying to like amp up Falmouth or anything, but the Falmouth is a kind of a creative industries, digital technology and art university, so it does very focused on transferable skills and giving students kind of business skills
Mm,
as well to set up their own businesses, so they're not
that's
yeah, so
good.
it is, yeah, I think that's really good. There's a games academy as well that's very focused in the games industry, and um,
I
teach
was going to
students in
say
that,
that
so
because the games industry is really big now, and
yeah.
it's getting bigger all the time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Somebody I know who does gaming music, and he does really seriously well out of it, and enough that
yeah, yeah.
that's what he does all the time. Yeah, this is all there to be explored basically. Um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think during the COVID, having lockdowns, I think there's you can work remotely easily, more easily than you could before, especially if you're online. So I think like Falmouth has kind of been doing a lot of blended learning. I think most universities are because of COVID, but yeah, I think we've done some interesting creative ways of teaching now because of that. So yeah, I think, but yeah, I think because of that, not having to rely on the kind of traditional model of the music industry where, finding a major label or anything,
yeah,
you don't have to do that anymore. I think you can make your own labels and
you can, and
your own scenes.
yeah, and there's YouTube, there's everything. There's Twitch, there's YouTube, there's
Yeah,
Bandcamp, there's SoundCloud. There's so many outlets now.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I think the music industry for years has been on its last legs anyway, and it was like, to be honest with you, it was like that in the 80s. By the late 80s, the
yeah,
writing was pretty much on the wall because the actual cost of making a record was getting greater and equal to what was actually coming back. So at that point, it's fairly obvious that it's
yeah,
unsustainable. Um,
definitely. It's changing. I don't know if it will stay the same as well. It's gonna change as things have to change, I guess.
yeah,
But more and more net labels are becoming bigger forces, I guess. And
yeah,
yeah, so but also
yeah,
the ability to produce your own music and get it out there yourself in any way. So
yeah.
yeah, but
Perfection. Have you been tempted to drive synthesizer hardware from live coding?
I have done in the past. Yeah, I don't really collect synthesizers or anything like that, so it's kind of I did a bit in Birmingham, but because I've been at one point, yeah, just kind of back and forth between here and and Canada, etc. I wasn't really interested in kind of accumulating a lot of like hardware, I guess. So, but yeah, I think I've done some stuff with I don't know some of the
Hmm.
sorry, the mic not the micro brutes. Those are not Korgs. Sorry,
Yeah, those the
the
Arturias.
base, the little tiny Korg devices. What are they? The modulars, and there's yeah, I
Oh,
don't
Oh,
they're
know.
called,
Volkers.
The
yeah,
Volcas thing, yeah,
Volkers.
sorry.
Yeah,
And also, I have a Teenage Engineering OPZ and OP1. I've done a little bit of stuff with that, but yeah, not so interested as much. I know, like Alex McLean, who's like the Algorave kind of founder, I guess, or but yeah, I can call him that. He's done some interesting stuff with tidal cycles and the Volcas. So he has done some really cool stuff with that. So yeah, but I have personally never really kind of pushed, appealed to me. But I'd rather just make music with those things rather than actually, you know, drive
yeah.
it with super quieter. It's a
Uh,
lot of things, connections, and a lot of things that could fail, points of failure, especially in a gig. So I think of that's kind of how I think about things when I'm planning out music and whatnot. So
I must admit, as you'd have seen from my studio, I've got quite a few big hardware sims. What I have to say, what I like about them is if Ableton does decide to crash, they'll keep going.
yeah,
You've got a keyboard with a sound.
Yeah, if you've got a
Jack
keyboard,
output.
you can make a sound. you can
that's
at
it.
least
Yeah,
at least save face.
yeah.
You're not been tempted by Eurorack of building yourself a modular and driving it from live coding.
No, not really. I've done some work, some like contract work to make the backend software for Eurotrack stuff, but not really for that's more utilitarian. But yeah, not really for actually working with them. I actually never. I've seen that there's some like VCV rack, I think it's called. It's a
Yeah.
virtual. That's I've looked around at that as well just to see how it works. But yeah, no, never really. Nothing yet. Maybe one day. Yeah.
Yeah, the great thing with VCV Rack is, of course, you can try this out before you start sort of shelling out for modules here, there, and everywhere, which could get to be
Yeah.
quite expensive, particularly if if the module it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, and it's a disappointment. So you can try all this out before you start spending money, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, for sure. I wouldn't mind looking into it at some point, though, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, it's just one of the ways forward. Yeah, it's interesting how all this can really evolve, particularly today. And today's forces. One of the things I've noticed about younger people getting into synthesis and getting into music is the barriers are really coming down. That
Hmm.
of my generation, there were all these big genre barriers between dance, between Berlin School, style electronics, which is
Yeah.
Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, that sort of thing, and from American techno to European techno. What's great, and analog versus digital, which is the tiresome argument, which sort of springs up on every forum now and again and turns into World War Three. The great thing is, for younger people, they're not bothered with all of this shit. They just get on with it, and that's what I find really refreshing and really interesting. And to see, yeah, they're not worried about what it can't do. They're more interested in what it can do, and I think that's much more positive and much more encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of Falmouth, I think, is a kind of interesting place because I won't get too deep into this, but yeah, there's a certain electronic musician who's you mentioned his name before, who lives down there. Who a lot of my students have hung out with, like Aphex Twin. Anyway, and he exists in that, he exists down there, and I think they're kind of, I think some of them hang out with him and they just make music with it. And there's lots of it. Yeah, they're just very interested in kind of just getting what they can get out of synthesizers. Not necessarily, they don't really care about what all the kind of technological fetishism that comes with it. And yeah, I think they've created their own sound, their own scene through that kind of vaguely familiar of his stuff from the 90s, and I think that's kind of, but also very different as well, kind of PC music based and stuff. And so genre bending is not necessarily looking at one genre, but different types of genres and mixing things together, I guess. And yeah, so that's kind of, and maybe that's because Cornwall is in the middle of nowhere, and we don't really have anything bearing down on us except, anything you want to do. So that's kind of cool, I think.
Yeah.
See that.
Favorite Aphex album?
Yeah.
What do you think's your favorite Aphex album?
I don't have one. Yeah, there's only a few Aphex Twin tracks. I hope he's not listening, but tracks that I really like. So,
He probably
yeah.
is. I
No.
I don't mind him hearing this. The
Yeah.
album by him that I really like is the second ambient album.
I like that one. Actually, I do like that one.
I really like all the tracks off of that. That to me is one of his most consistent albums, and
Yeah,
it's it's quite it's one of those albums that every time I listen to it, I find something else in it, which is quite rare for me. Leocardos is just on the chat room, but just said she likes Drux, which that's also a good album, and it's certainly got it's certainly got its high point. It's particularly the ones he did with the prepared disc clavier, which Chrissy absolutely hates because she's out. It's a plinkety plonkety plonk 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 plonk. But I actually like the way he done it, and I kind of think he's extended the Conlon Nankaro tradition in many ways. And yeah, it's great. I wasn't so keen. What did you think of Cyro?
Yeah, so that's,
Yeah,
yeah, it is. Yeah,
I'm mystified by it. I really don't have. Uh, I'm still listening to it. So yeah, if the Aphex Twins hearing that, great. I'm still listening to it.
oh yeah, no, it's a great album for sure. Yeah, and
I,
but
I,
yeah, I
I,
think he's.
I just haven't got round to understanding it yet. That's the point that I'm making. And I like music
Yeah,
that challenges me, so that's really cool.
yeah,
Yeah, we did another burning question, because I know you and I both like minimalism a lot. I think techno has extended minimalism into new lands. To me personally, it's extended classical minimalism through technology into really very new spaces. And I
hmm
kind of think now that the future of minimalism is techno and post techno, whatever that's going to be. I think that's the branch it's rightfully taken.
yeah,
What do you think? Because how do you view with classical minimalism?
yeah. I mean, I think that's why I like techno and I like minimalism because I like Bach. So it's like it all kind of
Yeah,
flows from
yeah,
that. Yeah.
sequences. It's
Um,
really
I
sequences.
don't think they're. Yeah, yeah. That's all it is, really. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, the kind of future of minimalism. I think there's no future for it. It exists because that's what it already exists. I guess. I think people can build on the principles of these things and create other types of music. But yeah, I think it's kind of fine as it is. If you think about like Steve Reich and
Hmm.
Philip Glass and yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I don't think techno is an evolution from it as much as it takes characteristics probably from that world. But dance music itself started through disco, a lot
yeah,
of it, and looking at Kraftwerk and most
yeah.
like techno is very much from Detroit. It's not from Berlin. It's not from Germany. It's not European at all. It's coming
No.
from disco. It's coming from funk. It's coming from
Mm.
hip hop, which hip hop sort of came from techno. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think obliterating that myth that techno is like this white European tradition is very wrong, I think. And it sort of, yeah, I don't think they were listening to a lot of Steve Reich, but listening to maybe Kraftwerk. So there was that connection, but also disco and
Yeah.
funk,
I,
etc. Yeah.
I must admit, I love funk. That's one of
Yeah.
my other passions. I used to get into no end of arguments on Facebook in various contemporary classical groups about this, and as you can imagine, and because one of the things that was a period when there was a recent BBC4 program on minimalism, they were all up in arms about, well, why are they looking at minimalism and why aren't they looking at spectralism and various other
Yeah.
new forms? And my answer to them but the thing with minimalism is you can see how it's spread from classical minimalism into various other things. You can see how Terry Riley spilled in to Mike
Oh yeah.
Oldfield, who spilled into other things. You can hear how it's spilled into Tangerine Dream. You can hear how it's spilled
hmm
into Kraftwerk. And
Yeah.
with
Oh
Tangerine
yeah.
Dream, you've got the ultimate of Toad of Stockhausen meeting minimalism head on, very often on the same album, and it's just great. And they're all up in arms. I said, well, yeah, but reason why people have done a documentary on it is because it's spread from its original base, and it now involves other people and other genres. And at that point, then any documentary maker could say, yeah, this has had an influence, this has had an impact on other people other than its original practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right for sure. Yeah, I think techno is it's taken so many different forms too. It's become like every kind of scene, I guess, or genre. Everyone thinks there's specific rules, but I think it started as future music. And if you read the Kodo and Eshwin's "Brighter Than the Sun," I think the book is called, where he talks a lot about it's all about the future, and that's why techno is kind of, to me, really interesting because it's all future sounds. And you
Yeah,
should listen to some of the like stuff that's coming out of Ukraine, like Stanislav Tolkachev and he's been accused of not actually making techno, even though that's kind of what he falls under. But a lot of it is very polyrhythmic, and that's a lot of the stuff I do too is just a little bit all over the place in terms of how fast it is too. So, yeah, I don't know. Everything techno is kind of an over umbrella term, I think, for a lot of different types of music. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I like polyrhythms myself. It's a big corner of what I do at times. But of the Eastern European stuff, where would you recommend people actually get into and start listening? What do you think's coming out of Eastern Europe that's particularly strong that people ought to hear?
Well, as I mentioned, yeah, Stanislav Tolkachev would be one definitely someone I would recommend listening to. He comes from the Skema scene, which is at CXEMA, which is a group of raves in urban spaces that happened after the revolution in 2014. So it's because of no one having their entire economy was just destroyed, and the youth were kind of had nothing to kind of work for. So they were raving all the time. Rave is a kind of form of protest in a lot of ways, and kind of I think it's important. It's an important thing to have. But yeah, so that would be a good. They have a whole YouTube series. I think you can find Boiler Room sets. You can find them on SoundCloud as well. I can send you the link to that. Yeah. But I think that's interesting stuff that's happening. So
please do, because I'm really interested in how this is developing from my own perspective as a composer and the stuff that I hear going on in my head. I'm really interested to hear where people are actually taking this, and the future certainly is what you can do with machines. It's this whole new level of traditionally, if you're a composer that you wrote it down or you played it yourself or an orchestra played it, we've now got to think of making machines make music, which is it's all part of the future, and it connects up in even on a very traditional means of a composer passing an idea on. It pretty much sits within that tradition of making machines make music, and likewise, you can interact with that. You can interrupt, you can interfere, you can intervene. There's all sorts of possibilities that there to be done. Yeah. Absolutely wonderful. And but viewers listening, do check out Nora Lorway's work. Check out the Xylem record label. There's some very, very interesting stuff in there. There's even a couple of albums of mine in there as well, if you matter. But
that's right.
Yeah, there's great stuff. Do check out, follow Nora on Twitter, follow Nora on Facebook, and by all means, Nora, when we can all start playing again, let me know, let us all know, and we can move forward. Certainly one day I'll come down to Falmouth if you'd have me and do a gig together. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think hopefully. Well, yeah, I guess we can't really put on gigs yet, but yeah, one day.
Yep.
One day.
Yep.
There'll be a stream as well, I think, happening. The stream, the Twitch streams. We'll have another one in October, which will be broadcast live from Falmouth at the university. So
that'd be brilliant. If you want, soon. Yeah, great. If you want me, I'll certainly be up to do another one, and hopefully this time Ableton won't embarrass me in front of God knows how many people. You're getting lots of love from Leah Cardos, who said that she very much likes you, very much enjoys your stuff, which is great to hear.
Thanks. Yeah,
this is great. So, okay, time's pretty much up. Thank you very much, Nora. Thanks, it's been really great. It's been really interesting, and we'll catch up again sometime in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been really great. I'll let you get your train now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you very much to Dr. Nora Lorway for a really interesting chat. And thanks for everybody that's joined us in the chat room. Sorry I couldn't respond to you. I was in the middle. You know me, I can't multitask. I can see your questions, I can see your comments, but I can't always reply at the same time. But great. Thanks to everybody for joining, and see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much.